to the sink. My old lady says that I ought not to. You'll get sick if you drink that water. Where's the blues? Where's the blues? Where's the blues? Baby, where's the blues?
So everyone, welcome to Let's Talk Native. It is it's March 26th, 2018. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No special Indian prayers, no buffalo speeches, no mystic healing. We tackle the real issues facing Native people, look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, simulcast and rebroadcast on the Gwe, that's CKWE in Tandanega. We stream the audio live at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, we are Facebook Live. We stream live on Facebook. And of course, the shows stay on our Facebook group pages. And, of course, we're streaming it on our Let's Talk Native group page. And then we share it to other group pages, including Let's Talk with John Kane on WBAI and several other pages across the internet that Facebook that have Native followers and Native members, and we do that. That's what we do here with this show. I am John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer, and I guess we've got a bit to talk about. It's after all, it's Monday, so we've had the weekend, and some things have taken place over the weekend. We got to listen to a porn star on 60 Minutes, or I didn't, but I know plenty did listen to the details of Donald Trump's compromising exploits. Of course, there was a major march on Washington, D.C. and state houses across the United States in protest to gun violence, specifically after the shooting in Florida 5 weeks ago. Look, and I got to tell you, I fully support the young people and those people who not only walked out of school, a week or so ago, but this march on Washington. Look, I applaud what these young people are doing. It gives me hope for the future generation, because frankly, this generation and past generations we've screwed up. I mean, we haven't gotten it done. And so I applaud it. If I do have criticism, and of course there are plenty of people who are offering criticisms, but if I do have a criticism on this protest to gun violence, is there hasn't been enough emphasis on the killer cops, on cops that have disproportionately taken the lives of people of color, and not just look. It's easy to say, okay, well, doesn't warrant this conversation because these cops are in the minority. You know what? Mass shooters are in the minority too. But you know what? Mass shooters, it's really easy to condemn them. But what happens in the situation with killer cops is that thin blue line we hear about, that people are, where it's a taboo to cross it. So there are police departments that won't prosecute their own. They barely investigate their own. In fact, they cover for it. They justify it. They try to characterize something as a good shoot, a good kill, regardless of whether the victim of that police shooting was armed or dangerous or really a threat. They don't have to really be a threat. They just have to have given the perception of a threat, or actually, they don't even have to give it. The policeman or the shooter, the police officer, only has to make a compelling argument that he felt like there was a threat or he sensed a threat. There doesn't have to be a real threat. That cell phone looked like a gun to me. That's what took place in Sacramento this past week. And by the way, Black Lives Matter and the people who were opposing that gun violence, that violence of a black man being shot 20 times and merely only having a cell phone, that warranted Black Lives Matter to shut down Interstate 5. Shut down the interstate. in a major city, Sacramento, California. So when I hear people out here say, well, we can't really just stop, block the throughway. I know the state's misusing us and abusing us and violating our sovereignty and interfering with our commerce. But if we block that throughway, they're going to open up a can of Patriot Act on our asses. No. You know what? Black Lives Matter just proved that to protest and to perform an act of civil disobedience like blocking an interstate, you're not going to end up in a cage in Guantanamo Bay, folks. So I just wish people would grow a pair and stop being so scared to stand up. Look, and it's not like we're not standing up. Tonight, a crowd of Native people, Senecas, and non-Native supporters, they took a bus down to Coudersport to protest this proposal for the Coudersport wastewater treatment facility to receive tens of thousands of gallons of hydrofracking water in their water treatment facility, which essentially will ultimately be dumped into the headwaters of the Allegheny. And there was a crowd that went through there, including counselors and prominent Senecas here from Cattaraugus and Allegheny and other places. The president of the Seneca Nation was there. I saw some of the live video feeds and that kind of stuff. And you know what? And they did a great job making noise over this issue. And in fact, thus far they've already gotten support from Kathy Young, New York State Senator. They've gotten support from the Salamanca City Council. They've gotten support from, I think, even from the village council is in Coudersport. Just not what they call the CAMA, the people who actually make the decision on whether they're going to do this or not. They still haven't gotten a commitment out of them not to do it. So, but I think they're making noise, and it looks like these guys are doing a good enough job shutting down this proposal and opposing the proposal. And I got to tell you, if Coudersport goes ahead and takes the money and this contaminated water, there will probably be hell to pay. It won't go well for Pennsylvania, Coudersport. And frankly, it won't go well for the people who are behind the fracking water in the first place. Guys like Terry and Kim Pagula. I still think that at the end of the day, you've got to put the blame, follow the money. And the people who we know in Western New York that have demonstrated the most affluence out of hydrofracking are certainly the Pagulas. And they're, as the owners of the Buffalo Bills, that's how they got to buy them. They got to buy them out of because of hydrofracking. They got to buy the Buffalo Sabres and the Buffalo Bandits, and they're throwing bunches of money at developing that whole area around the KeyBank Center and all this other stuff. But this wealth comes from someplace, and it's essentially being raped from the planet, and it has a downside to it. So. But I applaud those folks that went out to Coudersport tonight, and the water protectors. And I don't want to sound sarcastic when I say, "Yeah, but," because I've always got a "yeah, but," and the "yeah, but" is, but what about New York State? We understand what's happening in Pennsylvania, and the potential of some level of contamination in the Allegheny River, and I agree that we should make exactly the noise that was made. I wish I had time to go down there and get back for the show. I would have been right there with them. I'd have offered my 2 cents in this debate. But you know what I would have also said? What I would have also mentioned is that this kind of contamination in our rivers, whether it's the Allegheny River with this hydrofracking water, it's the downside of somebody's vision for making money. The Pagulas and the natural gas industry. This commercial activity has an environmental cost, and what's happening is they're trying to inflict the cost of that money making operation, that tapping into natural gas. They're trying to make us pay for it by putting the dirty water and the contaminated water, the radioactive water, into our watersheds. Just like just like here up in Cattaraugus with the Cattaraugus Creek. When they were proposing this idea of creating this West Valley nuclear storage and nuclear processing facility back in the 60s, the whole idea is they were going to have a business. Westinghouse owned the business for a while. They were going to have this business of reprocessing spent nuclear rods, and it was going to support the nuclear power industry, all this power generation that was going to create such cheap power they're almost going to give it away. That's what they called it. This cheap power they're going to produce with nuclear power. It didn't turn out that way. It turns out that most of the spent rods that came to West Valley, a nuclear processing facility, was from the military. It was part of that military industrial complex. But you know what? That's still an industry. That still has a commercial value associated with it. And who was going to pay the price for that? When they started dumping that stuff and storing that stuff and so-called processing these nuclear rods and these nuclear fuel, it leaches into a waterway. And everybody downstream, including the Senecas along the Cattaraugus Creek, are victims, are going to pay the price for that commercial activity. So, and I have to frame it this way because it's not enough to condemn the environmental hazards associated with the state or the feds or private industry and their pursuit of commercial success and commercial activity, financial success, because there's money associated with all this stuff. But when we have to pay the price for that, then look, you get right back to the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It requires, according to international standards, our free, prior, and informed consent before you start doing that stuff to our environment, to our water, to our air, to our lands. They didn't get it in West Valley. Of course, they can say, "Well, that was before this." Well, all right. Now there's also this idea of not only free and prior informed consent, but this idea of correcting the problems created by these impositions. There's this document is filled with the call for nation states to establish the reparation process and the redress process for these. And so we're trying to prevent them from ever having to get to this place of having to do redress with places like Outersburg. We're saying, just don't do it in the first place. Then we don't have to fight you for years over this thing. We don't have to do, millions of dollars worth of analysis on what you did to the river, and all those that are going to be affected by it, the cancer clusters and everything else. We don't have to go through that process. Let's stop it before it starts. But again, and the reason I keep trying to characterize even those activities, whether it's West Valley or whether it's the Scoutersport wastewater treatment facility. The reason I keep characterizing it as a commercial activity is because, again, our commercial activity is under attack. The very way that we support ourselves on native territories, and look, I know most people just view us as cigarette selling, gasoline selling, gambling promoting, rich guys. Well, that's not really the case. But we do have a private sector, and there are nation enterprises involved in the sale of tobacco and sale of fuel. And we're going to defend that as our right to do that. Again, many of those rights are laid right out in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. Our right to have an economy, a distinct economy. And by distinct meaning, we're going to exercise some of that regulatory advantage as we develop our economy that is separate from the regulatory systems of New York State or the federal government. That's the whole idea of having a distinct economy. And every economy in the world, all people of the world look to figure out, well, what do they have that they can offer? What is the advantage they have? What's the commercial advantage they have? What are the incentives? What are the regulatory advantages they have? And of course, we will exploit the regulatory advantages that we have, not at the cost of our environment, and frankly, not at the cost of health or any of that other stuff. Yeah, I know tobacco is bad for you, but we're not promoting cigarette smoking. And you know what? The fact that we have discounted tobacco products, it's still a lot more expensive than it was 20 years ago. Just because we aren't putting a sin tax on it to disproportionately tax poor people the way New York State has, doesn't mean that we're promoting an unhealthy habit. You want to promote? You want to see an unhealthy habit? You know what an unhealthy habit is? Dumping hydrofracking water into the headwaters of the Allegheny, dumping radioactive waste and trying to store it at the headwaters of the Cattaraugus Creek. That's an unhealthy thing to do too. And yet you're still doing it. And you know what? You know what else is unhealthy? Putting Bakken crude in bomb trains and launching them across the country, including cutting through Seneca territory. Much of the commerce that takes place as it crosses Seneca territory, in particular, whether it's on Interstate 86 through the southern tier and through the Allegheny territory, or whether it's cutting through the Cattaraugus territory on the New York State through Interstate 90. Look, I tried to make a point with what I see Black Lives Matter doing in California, because they were willing to take their demonstration and make a significant impact by shutting down Interstate 5. It didn't make a whole lot of news, though. It's on the East Coast, most people, when I tell this to them, I never saw it. Well, you got to look for it. It was on the internet. But yeah, Black Lives Matter, they spilled out onto a major interstate in California, and shut it down for a while. But even though our waters are being contaminated by state and federal commercial activity, even though we have two interstates crossing Seneca territory in particular, that there is plenty of commercial activity happening on those interstates, even though we have rail with bomb trains and hazardous materials crossing Seneca territory, not only threatening our access to Lake Erie and the lands associated around these easements that were granted for the rail and for the thruway and for the interstates, we don't seem to have a say. And so while our commercial activity is being undermined by the state, theirs is completely unencumbered. They can look there. We have no idea what they're running across Seneca territory on the thruway or on these tracks. And as we find out what they're trying to do to what they have done to our rivers in terms of radioactive contamination from West Valley, and what could be more radioactive contamination coming from hydrofracking water being dumped into water treatment facilities at the headwaters of the Allegheny, we're looked at like like we're just a bunch of tree hugging environmentalists. No, we're trying to protect our land and our water, not only for us but for our future generations. But we don't seem to be as committed to protecting our sovereignty for future generations, and that's where I got to come back to it, folks. I got to come back to it. What I've talked about over the last couple of shows is what New York State is doing in terms of trying to impose their state regulations on our commercial activity. So when the state pulls over a truckload of native tobacco products going from one native territory to another, and they say it violates New York State's regulations on the sale of tobacco in New York State, and what our immediate response is, no, it's not in New York State. But even though the wholesaler or the manufacturer or the distributor is going to make that argument, where are the rest of us? I mean, look, I know there's been this sentiment that has been bred within our territories for 30 or 40 years. Oh, there's the evil, selfish, greedy private sector native businessmen that are just exploiting everything. You know what? You know what they're doing? They're asserting sovereignty. And they're making money. Don't get me wrong. I have an issue with the amount of money that has been made in native territories and not evenly distributed. I do. I'm not saying that every guy who has a smoke shop should just give away free money to everybody. But, I look at the have and have-nots on native territories. Usually they're clearly established between those who work for tribal government and those who don't. But in places like our territories here in Haudenosaunee land and across the Confederacy and in Seneca territory and other places, we see that there has been a private sector that has been developed, and it got developed by asserting our regulatory advantages as it relates to the sale of tobacco and fuel. Now, people can condemn those guys who did that, but I don't know how you condemn somebody who actually takes our sovereignty and puts it to use in terms of generating an economy, putting people to work, developing a private sector economy, and again, private sector commerce. Those of you out there who want to condemn every person who made money selling tobacco, go ahead. I'm not a party to that. I'm not a fan of tobacco use and consumption, but I'll still defend it because of our sovereign right to do so. That's what I think my role here is to do. And when I look at what the state is doing, again, I'm going to come right back to it. Again, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Here's what Article 8 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples says. And I'm just going to read the first part of it because I don't have to say anything more. Indigenous peoples and individuals have the right not to be subjected to forced assimilation. I mean, let it sink in, folks. This is an international document. Look, this is my handy handheld copy, my pocketbook size UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But that's what it says. Article 8, Indigenous peoples and individuals have the right not to be subjected to forced assimilation. Well, what the hell do you think the state's doing? When the state is seizing product and then administering fines to people who are merely distributing a native product from one native territory to another for the sale of that product only to happen exclusively on native territories. And then the state says, no, we have the power and we have the authority to fine you or arrest you or lock you up or anything else. No, you don't. And in fact, the international community says you don't. They say you don't have the right to impose forced assimilation upon us. And by you trying to say that our commerce is your commerce and that we have to follow your rules, that by definition is the idea of forced assimilation. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It is subjecting us to your authority and you doing it by force. When you surround a vehicle with cop cars and you haul somebody away and you keep them confined for a period of time and then you seize the product, that is all an act of that's force. Then when you drag somebody into your courtrooms and say, I'm going to fine you $1.3 million for your commercial activity because you are, and this is what the state is saying, because you are conducting sales in New York State, and we say, no, we aren't. We aren't selling product in New York State. And we aren't selling a product that you have some claim to. We are selling a native product on our lands, which are not part of New York State. And I don't care how many times you want to cite the doctrine of Christian discovery and your right to assert, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg did. What did she say? Let me see if I can find it here. I think she insisted that. Here we go. Here's what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said only a decade ago when she was trying to rule against Oneidas reacquiring lost land in a claim area that they have a Supreme Court ruling in their favor. She said, under the doctrine of discovery, fee title to lands occupied by Indians. Notice she said occupied by Indians. And she says occupied Indians, when the colonists arrived, became vested in the sovereign, first the discovering European nation, and later the original states in the United States. So, she used that language. She doesn't say fee title to lands owned by Native people. She says occupied by Native people. But then she goes on to say that it became vested. Okay, so it wasn't vested in these Christian nations of Europe. It became vested. So, in other words, the Native people got divested. They had that land taken from them and then assigned somehow by God, apparently, because she cites it as the doctrine of discovery, but it's the doctrine of Christian discovery. And it's the Christian nations of Europe who are able to utilize this doctrine of discovery to say, all right, once a Christian nation of Europe discovers lands held by pagans, we can just simply take it. We can just claim it. We don't even have to take it. We just claim it. Now, this is a Jewish liberal justice on the Supreme Court of the United States citing this only in 2005. I mean, a little over a decade ago. And this is the same arrogance, the same racism that New York State is trying to impose when it says, no, you can't do your commerce. You don't have commerce. We have commerce. And if you're going to participate in the commerce that we allow, then you have to do it under our rules. That's forced assimilation. And you know this doctrine of Christian discovery, and I always feel compelled to read this because it is really important that people understand that, again, according to international standards, these racist doctrines that have been codified into U.S. law and that create that foundation of arrogance and racism that run from the President of the United States to the Governor of the State of New York. This is what the international community agreed upon in 2007 when they passed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And this is right at the beginning. This is part of the preamble. This isn't even in the articles of the Declaration. This is in the preamble. This is in the whole section where they affirm certain givens. They aren't establishing new international standards. They're just reaffirming and affirming what the standards are in the international community already. And this is what it says. Affirming that all doctrines, policies, and practices based on or advocating superiority of peoples or individuals on the basis of national origin or racial, religious, ethnic, or cultural differences are racist, scientifically false, legally invalid, morally condemnable, and socially unjust. I mean, that's at the beginning of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. But you know what? We don't cite this. And you know, and I said this on my last show. The federal government and New York State, you know, these non-native governments that try to impose their will on our territories, they've changed their strategy. They no longer do some broad-based attack on the Seneca Nation or the Mohawk communities or the Cayugas. You know, they don't do these broad, and they certainly don't attack us collectively as indigenous peoples. What they've done is they've gone after us individually. So when Eric White, you know, who people may regard positively or negatively, however you regard Eric. Eric is a friend of mine. He supports the show. But that's not why I'm advocating this issue. But when the state goes after Eric White and fines him $1.3 million for distributing a native brand from one territory to another native territory, most of us can just sit back and say, well, I'm glad they didn't go after me. Glad they didn't take anything from me. Eric White, he's made plenty of money. He can afford it. You know, he's got lawyers. We'll let him defend it. Well, the problem is, look, Eric's going to defend his company. He's going to defend his product. He may not defend it in the same way that when we're defending sovereignty. Where's the Seneca Nation on this thing? And I'm not saying they're not looking at this, but I would love to see the same attention given to this issue that they're given to the idea of contaminating water being contaminated. I'd like to see the press conference with Todd Gates. I'd like to see, you know, a circle of counselors standing behind him saying, no, hell no, state of New York. You're not going after one of our businesses. You're not going to make a victim out of any of our people. And you know what? We oppose not only if you do it to our people, but we oppose it if you do it to Mohawks, or if you do it to Onondagas, or you do it to Oneidas, or you do it to Unkachugs, or if you do it to Shinnecox. The idea of you imposing your will on native lands against any of us is imposing against all of us, and we're going to stand against you. That's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for somebody to say, look, If you're going to interfere with our commerce, we're looking at what the Black Lives Matter group did, what that movement did in Sacramento when you shot down another black man, unarmed black man, and they took to the streets and shut down the interstate. Don't know when we're going to do it. Look, you want to blame me for inciting this? Go ahead. Because, I've been on that thruway before. I've been on the highways before. I've stood up against New York State before. And I'll do it again when, as one of the guys on one of these, one of my Facebook posts says, I'm just looking for the call out. I'm waiting for the first, war whoop, and I'm there. Look, I'm not trying to incite a riot. I'm not trying to incite violence. But you know what? How long do you have to shut the thruway down to offset that $1.3 million you're trying to charge, one individual for merely conducting native commerce? Is it an hour? Is it 2 hours? I suspect it's not that long to start, costing the state or costing somebody, that unfettered commercial activity that's allowed to cross lands. Hey, it's about an hour. I'll take a break and we'll come back. We'll come back after this. We'll cut out with another tune. Be right back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
Razor wire cut you to the bone, son. It can make meanest long for home, and it's a crying shame. Just yourself to blame. Every morning when the sun comes up, you stand in your cage like a little pup. You wait for the man to turn the key. You step outside to greet. I raise a wife. It's a crying shame. Late at night when all the killers are down, hear the teardrops splashing on that concrete ground. It's a dangerous game. They cry for their own pain. A razor wire pain. Watch it gleam on that sunny day, tempting you to try beyond your way. You try to swagger like you don't care, but you're always under that wire's glare. A razor wire, it's a scary game. A razor wire's game.
All right, thanks for coming back. Hey, I do want to thank my sponsors, including Eric White and ERW Enterprises, which includes ERW Wholesale. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank individuals who, who step up from time to time, and just, drop a few dollars on us here or there. Guys like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice and Neville Spring, and anybody who, when they hear the show, think, man, I'm glad there's a voice out there saying this stuff. Don't be afraid to step up. There are plenty that have in the past. Some that, no longer think about us because we're not out there, soliciting advertisements and that kind of stuff. But I think all of you who have supported this program and have helped me do what I do for the last 7 years. We're entering in our 8th year here the spring and summer. I thank all of you for doing your part, joining in the fight, and doing your part to help me be a voice. And look, I don't suggest that I am the voice for Native people. I'm just a voice. I try to create a platform here. Look, I look at your comments. I look for what people have to say. Look, we got a studio here. Anybody want to join me here? Come in and offer their thoughts or their concerns, their questions, or their critiques. We've got a studio here. That's what we do here. We're located here on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. I'm not asking people to barge in the middle of a show, but let's set up a time. Let's have you come in and join me. Look, I've had community members who, frankly, may not have had much to say. They just want to sit in studio. We got a big space here. We've got a video studio as well. So, look, that's what we've built here so we can get our message out. Not just so people can hear me, so they can hear you. So that's what we've got built here, and that's what we've done over these last 7 years. We've created an audience. We've created a bit of a rapport with not just with you, the listening audience, but other, even the mainstream media. I'll get invited from time to time to for a newspaper interview or a television interview, or run out to Albany and do the Capitol Press Room or whatever. That's what we've built here, is try to lay out a foundation or a platform for us to have a conversation. And that's what we do here. Look, I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. I want to thank CKWE for doing the broadcast and the rebroadcast, the simulcast. I also want to thank some of the other internet networks, Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio, all of you who carry the show in part or in total, carry the show. Look, I also want to thank those of you who share the show. My wife is somebody who is pretty active putting the Facebook live streams on other group pages. I know I've got folks like Toby and other people who are doing it. I appreciate all of you who watch the show, hear the show, listen to the show, and share it, whether you're sharing the Facebook live stream, whether you're sharing the YouTube videos. We take that our video of the show and we put it on YouTube on our own channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. It's actually, if you're not listening to us live or watching us live, it's probably the best experience watching the show is doing it on our YouTube channel. So I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel. Again, it's Let's Talk Native TV. Subscribe to the channel, and then you'll get notifications every time we put this thing up on YouTube. I also post the shows on SoundCloud, and so those of you who are sharing the audio from via SoundCloud, I appreciate all of you doing that. Look, part of it is promoting Let's Talk Native as a solid brand for Native commentary, but really it's about just putting a voice to some of these issues. And the reason I talk about the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is that it was passed over a decade ago. 2007 it was passed. And we still have many Native territories, even as we battle the state and the federal government, or we battle industry, or we battle local governance. I mean, look, what the Seneca Nation is fighting down in Coudersport isn't against the state of Pennsylvania. It's against a little municipal authority. It's a small, little, tiny, again, municipal service that is provided through its wastewater treatment facility. That's, look, in their defense, they're just trying to make ends meet. I mean, some of these small towns, they don't have a whole lot of revenue. So, I mean, all of a sudden the oil and gas industry says to them, hey, look, we'll pay you if you take 50,000 gallons of fracking wastewater. No, we're not going to tell you what's in it, and you can just run it through your standard wastewater treatment facility. Don't worry about what gets through that. It'll just go in the river, and nature will take its course. Yeah, nature will take its course as that course runs through the Seneca Nation territory of Allegheny. So, I mean, some of our battles are with industry, with municipal governance, with counties and states and feds, and we don't have we seem to neglect that there is an international standard that has been set. And, and I got to tell you, the problem with this international standard is that it's not a high standard. I mean, it's a pretty low standard for the most part. And in fact, One of the articles of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 43, it explains exactly what this is. Yeah, it's a declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples, but it says, the rights recognized herein constitute, and I'm putting the word only, but it constitutes the minimum standards for survival, dignity, and well-being of indigenous peoples of the world. So, again, let me read it with the word that I think should be in there. The rights recognized herein constitute only the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of indigenous peoples of the world. This is not a high standard. It is a minimum standard. You would think affluent nations of the world would be above this minimum standard. And, of course, what's the most affluent nation of the world? What is the world's only claimed superpower? The United States. But, the United States voted against this thing in 2007. And when the Obama administration finally did offer to endorse this international standard, they did so tepidly. And they did so, almost, it was contingent on something. What Obama said is, I endorse the aspirations of the agreement. So, in other words, I don't actually endorse the agreement, but I kind of endorse what the agreement is trying to do, what the declaration hopes to do. So when you say, I endorse the aspirations of the declaration, okay, but why don't you just endorse the declaration? Well, I endorse the aspirations of the agreement, provided it doesn't conflict with U.S. law. Look, don't you get it? U.S. law is the problem. You know why U.S. law is the problem? Because at the foundation of all of the laws of the United States that impact indigenous people, native people, what they call federal Indian law. You know what federal Indian law is based on? No, it's not based on treaties. No, it isn't. It's based on the doctrine of Christian discovery. Under the doctrine of discovery, fee title to the lands occupied by Indians when colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign, first the discovering European nations, and later the original states, and then the United States. And, look, the doctrine of discovery wasn't just about land. It was about control, authority. It was about domination. Stephen Newcomb doesn't just call it. He actually, he'll reference it as the doctrine of discovery, but he calls it the doctrine of domination. Because what it said, and where does it come from? It comes from the church. The United States is supposed to have the separation of church and state? No, they don't. They don't. Not just because you have evangelicals putting a moron like Donald Trump in office. Not just because of that. The foundation of the laws, they don't just put in God we trust on their money. For 200 years, the United States promoted itself as a Christian nation. And they used the doctrine of Christian discovery to say, that's how we get to claim the land. They didn't have title. We lived here before Europeans showed up. And we didn't just live here. We weren't just nomads roaming aimlessly across the forests and the plains. No, we had homes here, permanent homes. We had homes for winter. We had homes for summer. We had homes. We tilled we didn't till the soil. We planted, because we didn't turn over every acre of land to plant our crops. No, we did mound farming. We cleared forests. We cleared the underbrush of forests. There were some accounts when Europeans came here, they said, when we entered the forest, it was like a park. There was no underbrush. It was cleared. You could ride horseback under a canopy of trees with nothing in the way. Well, you think nature does that by itself? Have you seen what wilderness looks like? There's underbrush, there's brambles, there's dead tree fall. No, we cleaned it. We took care of it. We maintained our forests. We cleared some of those forests for farming. And we did it for thousands of years before the first white man showed up. meaning the Vikings that we kicked their asses and sent them home. And we were doing it for thousands of years before other Europeans would show up. We did it for thousands of years before Africans and Asians would come. And we maintained this land in a way that put us in a role with nature. We didn't just defy nature. Yeah, look, beavers build dams. But we didn't do that kind of thing. We didn't try to upset nature. We worked with nature. We took only what we needed. We made sure that our presence here on our lands, on the lands we occupied and lived on, that we secured it for future generations. Not just future generations of our own, but future generations of deer and the wolf and the bear and all of those animals we liken ourselves to with clans, for the heron, for the hawk, for the eagle, for the turtle, for the buffalo. When we talk about 7 generations and doing the things we do to maintain the land and to make our decisions with thoughts about how it would impact future generations, it isn't just generations of people. We didn't have the attitude that we were God's chosen species on the planet. That was a European construct. Other cultures may have had that, but no, we didn't think ourselves as the lords and masters of the planet. We didn't think that God or some creator put everything here just for us. So we had a completely different concept. But you know what? We were here. And we maintained a life here. This was our home. So when a European country shows up with a papal bull, and I don't mean BS in bull, but I mean this idea of a document issued by the Vatican that says, look, if you're a Christian nation of Europe and you come across non-Christian, you can just take their stuff. You can make them into slaves. You can claim their land. And then they take that church dogma, and then even after the Canandaigua Treaty and other documents where the founding fathers of the United States made clear, and European founding, like Great Britain and Spain and France, even after these countries acknowledge us as equals and enter into agreements where they understand that we need to give them permission to do certain things, including commercial activity, the beaver wars. I mean, this was our control over the commerce associated with trapping and hunting. But those nations, including the United States, put to pen a full acknowledgement that we owned our lands. And that the United States would never claim the same. That's what they said. They wrote it. They wrote that on a document. That's what the Canandaigua Treaty says 3 times. 3 times in the Canandaigua Treaty, the United States says, we recognize the land is yours and we will never claim the same, nor will we interfere with the free use and enjoyment of that land by you or your allies. That's what the United States said. We didn't write that. White people wrote that. And yet, in 1823, 30 years after the Canandaigua Treaty, Justice John Marshall would say, this whole doctrine of Christian discovery, that's really how we get to claim the land. We get to claim the land because we are the Christian nations of Europe that came here. And under church dogma, when the Christian nations of Europe arrived, they just got to claim land. Because look, native people don't really own land. They just live there. They're like the animals. So, dehumanize us, suggest that we never really owned the land that we lived on, in the European sense. And you might be right there. We didn't own it in the same way that Europeans did, because Europeans believe that to own land means to exploit it, to rape it, to pillage it. No, that's not the way we had. That's not our relationship with the land. We had a different relationship. But you took that, used church dogma to say, no, native people don't hold title to the land. No, they don't own land. Even though 30 years ago, Your government says, oh, we recognize the land is yours, and we'll never claim your land. Never. That's why today we say Cattaraugus, Allegheny, all the other territories that are part of the Confederacy, that are part of the indigenous population here, say, no, we're not part of New York State. New York State may be around us. Look, we sold off lands. We're defrauded out of plenty of it. But the lands that we occupy, the lands that we have reserved for ourselves, no, it's not part of New York State. In fact, not part of the United States. And you can't claim it. You can say it, but you have no legal foundation to suggest how our land becomes part of New York State. You have no legal way to assert that the commerce we conduct on our territories is the commerce of New York State. So what you do is you never address the issue. What you do is you keep passing laws about your authority in New York State, and you just assume that you can impose those same laws, those same regulations on us. And you can't. You can't. You know, and again, I said it last week, and I'll say it again. Even in the cases where you've tried to do that, not just in New York State, but in other states, the courts have always held, look, even if you're trying to impose some sort of tax burden on Native people, when they're conducting a commercial activity that is the same as the commercial activity outside, or that their commercial activity is involving products that they're only buying from the outside and then selling. And I'm talking about tobacco. This is what was said in the Attia case. It said the specific kind of tax obligation that New York's regulations are designed to enforce, and other states, that is, which are designed to enforce, which fall on the non-Indian purchaser. So in other words, anytime that we are selling to a non-native, the view is if we're selling a product that is only cheaper because they're buying it here because it doesn't have the tax on it, that if the courts uphold a state's right to pre-collect a tax or impose a tax that ultimately we have to pay because we're going to, if we're conducting that commerce, what they said in Attia is that these kinds of regulations that New York State is trying to do and other states are trying to do, which fall on the non-Indian purchaser of goods that are merely retailed on the reservation, that stands on a markedly different footing from a tax imposed directly on Indian traders, meaning us, on enrolled tribal members, and not my language, but theirs. That, again, it means us, or tribal organizations, or on value generated on the reservation by activities involving the tribes. So, in other words, even as you're writing these laws, you know the courts have always distinguished a difference between you trying to tax us directly for our activities, including the sales of products, but specifically, you trying to tax us for something that is a native brand or has value added by native activity. So whether it's something we manufacture or something that we design, something that we develop, something that we brand, something that we market, something that we distribute, that is different from what is distributed in your commercial stream, what your courts have said is that's different than trying to pre-collect a tax on Marlboros, for instance. So, but you see, you don't. What you do is you don't acknowledge that, and then you pass a bunch of laws, and then you go after an individual, and then what happens is the state and the federal government, the states, I should say, create a precedent in attacking individuals who may or may not have the resources to fight these charges, or may not have the same argument as an individual or as a business person with a product. They may not make the same argument that the nation would make, or a nation, or the people who are really defending sovereignty. See, there is a difference in defending your right to do business and defending the sovereignty that should be recognized that allows that business to develop and to prosper. There is a difference there. Now, I'm not suggesting that a business person can't make the sovereignty argument, but ironically, there have been cases where the Seneca Nation and other nations have said you cannot use treaties as your defense. Look, I'm not a big fan of treaties anyway. I think most of them suck. But to suggest that an individual can't use a treaty to defend themselves when the nations remain silent on the subject, or and here was a case with the Seneca Nation when the state was first trying to stop New York State wholesalers from supplying us. This Judge Arcara, literally asked the lawyers for the Seneca Nation, "Are you suggesting that there's a treaty violation here?" And the lawyers checked up. They choked. They were afraid to say the sovereignty is being violated. That sovereignty that is affirmed by treaty is being violated. That's what we're saying. The lawyers wouldn't say it. They were afraid to. Why? Because they said, well, if we let a white man in a black robe make the determination on our treaties, what do you think was going to happen? They're doing it every freaking day. But you think if a white man in a black robe makes a ruling against our sovereignty argument, that our sovereignty is diminished by that white man? It's being diminished by a white man in the governor's mansion right now and in the White House right now. Look, we need to assert ourselves. And I'm not just saying take them to court. I'm saying when we get dragged into the courts, let's make a compelling argument. Let's make the right argument. And let's not leave it up to just Eric White to defend the sovereignty of the Seneca Nation or the sovereignty of the Haudenosaunee, of every one of our territories. Let's not leave it on Eric White to do that. Because he's got to defend his little business here, which pales by comparison to the sovereignty that we need to assert and defend every single day. Look, sovereignty is not our defense. We need to defend sovereignty. Sovereignty might be Eric White's defense, but it's up to all of us to defend that sovereignty. We're not going to keep our rivers clean. We're not going to stop dangerous and hazardous materials from flowing across our lands or down our rivers if our sovereignty isn't intact. Like I said, let's put our water protector t-shirts on and sweatshirts. And let's march on the thruway and say, no, you can't traverse our territories with your contamination while you're trying to stop us from just conducting native to native trade. I know I've talked about it the last couple of shows, and I'm going to keep pounding on this, folks. Hey, look, I'm showing the Doctrine of Discovery film in New York City at Brooklyn, at the Brooklyn Commons, Wednesday night at 7:30. Join me. Please do. Come down and join me at the Brooklyn Commons, 7:30. That's Wednesday, March 28th. And not only will you get a chance to see a powerful, important film, but we'll discuss it too. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll see you on Friday. Thanks.